Hello again. My name is Vanessa Andreotti. For those of you who watched the first presentation, I hope it was an enjoyable presentation. Today, we're going to talk about key debates in equality, justice, and human rights, which I kind of collected together under the banner of Global Citizenship Education. So, I'm going to start today with an activity that I generally do with teachers or secondary school students related to the idea of justice, but justice in a world scenario, in a global scenario. So, um, when we talk about justice in a global scenario, generally we come up um, against this idea of the North and South. Now, if you look at the map, it is a problematic map, and it's an old map that talks about North and South, not really in terms of geographical positionings, but in terms of wealth and poverty. So this is one way of talking about wealth and poverty. It's to refer to this idea of the North and the South. There are other ways of talking about it in relation, for example, to the terms developed, underdeveloped, developing. Um, some of them are now politically incorrect in certain contexts, especially this idea of developed and developing, because countries have contested the idea that there's only one way to develop. There's also the idea of first, second, and third worlds, which are to do with the divisions after the Second World War between capitalist, communist, and non-aligned nations, nations that had neither chosen capitalist or communist at the time, and that's to do also later on with the Cold War. But today we're going to stick to the North and South idea, although it's problematic, in order to talk about the problems of justice. Now, of course, when you talk about North and South in terms of poverty, if you think about geography, there's poverty in the North as well, and there's a lot of wealth in the South. That's why this term is problematic. But at the same time, there is a division where certain people are seen to be in a position to help others. And that's why these terms are useful, because they highlight that generally help, knowledge, and expertise comes from the north to the south, like from countries like in Europe and Canada, the United States, to Africa, Latin America, and Asia. It's interesting that countries from Eastern Europe are in a very ambivalent position because they are not the North, or they are now part of the North, but they haven't always been seen like that. And they are not the South, or sometimes they are seen as the South. Um, and it is a very ambivalent and a very complicated position to be in. So, if we take this North and South as a construct about poverty and wealth, what we can see, and this has been used in policies and academic discourses, what we can see is that there is an unequal distribution of wealth between the North and the South. So, for example, the North, according to that map, has 21% of the world's population, and it has 84, and it holds 84% of the world's wealth. In the but however, in that sense, it's also complicated within the north, because 50% of this wealth, and this is statistics of 2003, so it has changed too. But in 2003, 50% of this wealth stayed with 20% of the people, and the other 50% stayed with 80% of the people. Now, if we had a classroom, what we could do is to have cookies. Like if we had a classroom of 30 students, if we had 30 cookies, and if we divided the class between the north and the south, so we would have around 6 students in the north, and around 24 of the cookies go to the 6 students. So 3 students would get 50% of this 24 cookies, so they would get 12 cookies, whereas the other 3 would have to share the other 6. So some students would get 2 cookies, other students would get more. So this might be a good activity to do if you have a group of students and if you wanted to do the cookie distribution. So according to this, then, the South has only 79% of the world's population and 16% of the world's wealth. Uh, of course, it has more wealth, but this wealth then is then controlled by people in the North. And within the South, the distribution is not equal either. 80% of the wealth stays with 20% of the people, and 20% of the wealth is shared amongst 80% of the people. So if we go back to the cookies, the 6 cookies that were left, 80% of the 6, which is like 5, would go to only 20% of the population. And the other 80% would be left with only 1 cookie to share. So most of the people in the North would get only crumbs, only pieces of the cookie. And of course, this is a situation of distribution that comes from history, but that sometimes in the present causes a lot of conflict. So the next part of the activity is about this conflict. It's a person from the south, here at the bottom of the stairs, talking to a person in the north about why this distribution is there. Why is it that some people get only crumbs and other people get so many cookies? And you can say that in between these people, in order to protect the cookies of the person from the north, there's a border, there's military, there's a lot of security questions. And when I do that with my students, I do get people to be the security as well, to show how materially it affects people's lives in very deep ways. This question of unequal distribution of wealth and of labor too, because the North people then are the people who get the jobs that pay more, and the Southern people are the ones left with the jobs that don't pay very much. So let's see what happens if this question is asked between these two people here. So the Southern people is saying, why is it that we get only crumbs? And the Northern people says, we are rich because we are superior. We have worked harder, we are more civilized, we are more educated, we know better. The Southern person then replies, you're rich because you colonized us in the past. You invaded our land, stole our resources, and enslaved and killed our people. And you continue to do that in a different way. Then the Northern person replies, we colonized you, but we also taught you important things like progress. We educated you. You are still poor because you do not work very hard and because your culture is backwards. The Southern person replies, this is outrageous. We work extremely hard, but you continue to steal from us. You don't pay a fair wage for our work or a fair price for our products, and you make us pay you a lot of money in that interests too. The Northern person then says, we still give you a lot of money in aid. We are very charitable people. You are poor because your leaders are corrupt and you keep fighting one another. And the reply is that for every cent of charitable money you give us, you take away at least 10, not to mention what you have stolen in the past. We do have problems, but you sell the guns to the people who are fighting, and you also participate in the corruption here. The fights and the corruption make you even richer, and most of us poorer. This is nonsense, says the person from the north. What you need is proper instruction and a proper attitude like we have. If only you were educated like us. The southern person replies, look at the attitude of your people. They are only happy when they compete or buy things or consume. They don't respect one another or the environment. They are very selfish. And look at what you're doing to the world. You consume most resources, you produce most waste, you are destroying everything. You need to stop thinking you are superior and listen. Now, this is a situation between two representatives that may not represent the other people of their respective social groups. So we're going to see other responses that could be possible both in the South and in the North. So in the South, we have another three perspectives here. Hey, what are you talking about? That northern person was right. We are behind and we need to catch up. If we listen to them, if we work harder, and if we buy what they sell, one day we will be even better than they are. The next person says, you're crazy. They will never allow us to catch up. It's their game. They make the rules. Why would they want to lose? We have to change the game so that it becomes fair for all and for the environment. Next person says, I don't think we can change the game. There's no hope for negotiation. They don't care about us. We should destroy this game and make them pay for what they've done. In the same way that it's not completely homogeneous in the South, there are lots of different perspectives. There are also lots of different perspectives in the North. First one is, hey, what are you talking about? The Southern person was right. In order to be rich, we have kept them poor. We need to find a solution together to change the situation, or we will all perish. Second person says, you're crazy. We have the answers. We have nothing to learn from them. We need to teach them to be like us. And the last one says, we have tried to teach them, we have tried to help. It has not worked. They're hopeless. And we have our own problems here. We should leave them to sort out their problems and concentrate on our own. So this activity shows that um, there's a diversity of perspectives around a very interesting mechanism that is very real, the mechanism of distribution of poverty and wealth. Of course, not all people in the South are poor and not all people in the North are rich. But it's important to understand this mechanism and the knowledge produced about this mechanism, how people think about it, in order to be able to understand what we can teach about these things in the classroom. The next thing I would do after this activity with my students is to get, or my teachers, my student teachers as well in pre-service education programs, is to get them to think about their own response to this diversity. So I would give them some time, as I'm going to ask you to have now, to respond from your own perspective. What is your response, gut feeling response to this activity? Write it down or draw it somewhere. With students, with secondary school students and primary school students, sometimes I've used it already with primary as well. I ask them to draw instead of write. So after doing that, I would then ask them to get into pairs and formulate a question together about whatever they want to talk about in relation to this topic. But the question needs to start with the phrase, I wonder. And I would give them about 10 minutes to negotiate a question together, a burning question. After that, I would collect all the questions, read all the questions to the group, and then ask them to vote on one question to discuss collectively. And after that, I would try to facilitate this discussion, trying to move them away from consensus. So the activity then would be to try to get them to think about other ways of thinking about these things. But I would also model 6 different questions that I would like them to start asking themselves. And these questions are related to power and to the implications of our own assumptions. Question number 1 would be, who decides about these things in society, in our own context? In whose name? Question number 2. And for whose benefit? So 3 questions. Who decides? In whose name? For whose benefit? So whatever the students would say, I would try to ask them, but wait a minute, who decides these things? In whose name? For whose benefit? And the other 3 sets of questions, of my 6 questions, would be, where is this coming from? Why do we think like this? Where is this going to? What are the implications of thinking like this? And how could this be thought in a different way? How could this be thought otherwise? So again, 6 questions. Where does this go? Who decides? In whose name? For whose benefit? Then where is this coming from? Where is this leading to? And how can this be thought differently? So for example, if we got the last perspective in this slide, we have tried to teach them, we have tried to help, it has not worked. I would be asking questions about who thinks like that in society? Who do you know that thinks like that? What groups think like that? Where does it coming from? Where is it coming from? Where does it come from? What are the assumptions informing this perspective? What are the implications of thinking like that? And what are other perspectives about the same issue? The same thing about power. Who decides that this is the way to see things? In whose name and for whose benefit? Yeah, so this is the way I would facilitate the discussion if we were together today. But because this is happening online, I I will just leave the ideas with you, and if you want to do it with the facilitator of your session, you're welcome to. Otherwise, we'll just continue talking about this. Now, another way of talking about this distribution problem is um, this sculpture by Jens Gauschiot, who is a Danish sculptor. And he created a sculpture, which I think is also problematic, but it's very useful pedagogically, to talk about the idea of justice. And he called the sculpture Justitia, the European goddess of justice. And this is the text that goes with the sculpture. I'm sitting at the back of a man. He's sinking under the burden. I will do anything to help him, as I'm a very good goddess, except get off his back. Now, this represents the idea that Europe has got to be so wealthy, has got to be so rich because of exploitation. So if we didn't have Africa and Latin America or Asia to provide us with resources that we pay very little for, we wouldn't be able to get so rich and so um, large in terms of wealth. And in order to change the situation, I would be going against my own interests. So it's much better to say that we can help Africa, we can help Asia, we can help Latin America, as long as we continue to do the things that keep us wealthy, which can keep them poor. So that's the hypocrisy of the situation. So that initiatives to help them actually do not address the um, the core of the problem. Um, Slavoj Žižek has got also a video on YouTube about that called First as Tragedy, Then as Farce, that I really recommend if you have time to see it, that talks about the same mechanism. That when we talk about justice, I think what we both try to emphasize is that when we talk about justice, we need to think about the origins of the problem and how we are implicated in the problem as well, how our national interests and even sometimes our personal interests are implicated in the production of the problem that we have. You're going to see also a film later on in the course about sustainability called The Story of Stuff. This is a film that it's very useful to use with students as well, that talks about how, for example, our desire to buy cheap stuff and to have all this variety of things in the store actually creates the problem of injustice, because the resources need to come from somewhere. The labor needs to come from somewhere. And if we just want to have more stuff and have cheap stuff, or pay less money for this stuff, somebody has got to pay for it. And they're paying, what the film says, that they're paying with their lives. So that reproduces again the situation in this picture, this sculpture, that whenever we're trying to deal with problems of justice, we need to think about how poverty is created, what the connection is between wealth and poverty creation, between the creation of wealth and the creation of poverty. How is this historically connected? And our own implications, our own how our own thoughts and desires contribute to the reproduction and the maintenance of the problem. When we're talking about then how to sort this out, the first question that I think is is a contentious question in this debate is about expertise. Who has the expertise to solve this problem, or can this problem be solved if there are so many conflicting interests in it? And generally, there are two camps in this debate. There's the camp of those who think that world experts can solve the problem, and others say that world experts have been trying to solve this problem and they have just made it worse. And who are these world experts anyway? So in the middle here, we have the questions again that I mentioned before. Who decides, in whose name, and for whose benefit? Where could this be coming from? Where can this lead to? How can it be thought differently? So here we would have three different perspectives about how the problem can be solved. Some experts would say that poverty is a result of ignorance. Therefore, if we just give them the knowledge, people are going to be able to um, work themselves up to their own wealth and development. Other people think that poverty is not a problem of knowledge or of ignorance. The people who are poor are actually quite knowledgeable. Poverty is a problem of justice and exploitation. So there's another perspective here. Other people say that, and if it's a problem of exploitation, the problem actually is with those who exploit more than with those who are exploited. There are other people who say that the people who are exploited need to take control of the situation and fight, be empowered to fight for um, better means of producing wealth in ways that are not controlled by outside forces. So the debate is there, and I think from my perspective, it's our responsibility to put the debate there for the students to engage with. In the same way, we have interesting perspectives about human rights. People just think that um, the issue of injustice is just a matter of the government upholding human rights and people believing in human rights. So that's one perspective that if we just teach people about human rights, the world is going to be a better place and we will have justice. Other people say that it's not such what people believe is one thing, what people do is another thing. And even if governments uphold human rights, like many governments have signed up to this, even wealthy governments, um, they only uphold human rights when it's in their interest to do so, or in the interest of property, in the interest of the economics. So it's not what these people say is that nation states are not about people, they're about the economy, about property protection. So when human rights go together with that, that's fine. When human rights, upholding human rights goes against the interests of property, any government will uphold the interests of property above the idea of human. Other people will say that human rights are a Western idea that are being imposed on other people, that they are based on very individualistic values that are connected both um, with Eurocentrism and capitalism, and that they only aim to promote these values and ideas across the world. Um, Other people still would say, well, yes, they are, but then some groups, oppressed groups, have used these things, have used human rights against the state. So they're not completely bad or completely good. Human rights is it's a tool, and it can be used in both ways. It can be used as kind of a tool for colonialism. And there's a very good book that talks about that, which is called Grassroots Postmodernism, Education as a Trojan Horse for Development. That's a very good book if you're in perspective. So it can be used for colonialism, or it can be used in a different way. It can be reappropriated. So the discussion about human rights is very lively and very contentious. So it's something, again, that the students should be able to engage with. Now, just presenting human rights as the solution to our problems might be a bit naive politically and complicated, but many global education initiatives actually do that. And that may be a good start for something. But if you start with the presentation of human rights as the solution, it's very important to bring critical perspectives in and to problematize it further a bit later in the process. So not um, the next, that's the next issue that is also related to expertise is what counts as knowledge and whose knowledge counts. So here we have the issue that um, Western knowledge, it's mainstream Western knowledge in forms of schooling have promoted the idea that there is universal knowledge and then there's local knowledge. Universal knowledge is good for everybody, while local knowledge is only good for local. It's a very good film again called Schooling the World that questions this idea. And what they say in the film is that global knowledge or universal knowledge, which is often Western knowledge that is taught in schools, is only about metropolitan consumerism. It's about living in cities and it's about being able to take part in capitalist activities. And this knowledge actually is not sustainable because capitalism is not sustainable. So what they talk about is the importance of actually other ways of knowing, of other knowledge systems to balance the possibilities open for our students. And they talk about the importance of having always more options and more ideas about what a good life is. So one of the criticisms in the film is that rural livelihoods um, are not seen as valuable anymore. However, what we need to do to survive is actually to eat. So there's a mass movement of children from rural areas to the cities, and this the cities cannot accommodate all of them, and there's not enough opportunities in the cities for them to even be part of the production of wealth. So you have this enormous gap where people in rural areas do value education, but this education is taking their children to a future that is not as good as it could have been if education also valued other forms of knowing and other forms of life apart from the lives of people in the city, of the consumers. So there's another discussion here as part of the debates about justice. So in terms of teaching about these things, when we teach about global citizenship, about belonging to a world that is complex, it's uncertain, it's plural, and it's deeply unequal, we have here at least three possibilities. First possibility is to see that we are educating wealthy people to be compassionate world leaders who will fix the problems of the poor. The second perspective is that we have to educate people to be competitive in a global knowledge economy where they will need to work with people from different cultures. And then we have educating wealthy people to work in solidarity with the poor to fix the problems that the generation of their wealth created for other people. These three things are conceptualized as global citizenship education. So when you look at documents, policy documents, and the literature on this, you will see the three things there. And I think for me as an educator, this is something that I need to think about what am I doing in my classroom with my students, and what my choices are, and in what context for doing these different kinds of things. and what the limitations of these different things are as well. Then we can go back to the questions we talked about before of who decides in whose name for whose benefit, where is this coming from, where is this leading to, and how can it be thought otherwise to be able to make better informed decisions. Um, so what I would like to suggest today is that you stop at this point to have a discussion about this, thinking about the questions that I've just posed, and thinking about what would be possible. That's one question. And what would be desirable? That's the other question in your own context of work. And what would be the challenges also of trying to do one thing or the other? So I hope you have enjoyed the session as well. And here is the reading that I recommend. It's part of your package, I think, in relation to global citizenship education, human rights, and justice. And I hope to see you soon in relation to multicultural education. Thank you.